Okay, Psalm 25. Let's work through this together. Le David. Le David, we said Mizmor Le David is the means through which David gets inspired through his own poetry, let's say. And David Le Mizmor is when David recollects the past. Le David is, as you say in Hebrew, stam, meaning it's without qualification. And it does not seem in the poems that begin with Le David that we end with the same kind of resolution that we do in the other kinds of poems. I think we really find David very much in the middle here. That is, when we see David, Le David, where the end is always in play, meaning there is always that temporal frame in the future to which David is aspiring. But David is very much in the middle here. Le David elecha Hashem nafshi eso. I am to you, God, my soul esa. Esa is going to mean a lot of different things. Another reason that Psalms are impossible to translate. Esa can mean to sacrifice. Esa, to bring, the commentators say, to bring a mincha, to bring an offering. It can mean to devote or dedicate oneself. It could also mean to raise oneself up. And the interesting thing is the idea of, on the one hand, sacrifice or lowering oneself, on the other hand, raising oneself. So you get both of these things in the Hebrew. That is, things that really move in opposite directions. Elokai b'cha b'tachti, I trusted in you. Al evosha al ya'altsu, ya'al ya'altsu oiveli. Don't let my enemies exult over me. Don't let me be ashamed. Don't let me be disappointed. I think the disappointment of the translation here is, I'm hoping for a positive future. Don't let me be disappointed. Gam kol kovecha, and here David generalizes it. Gam kol kovecha lo yevushu bogli rekam. Gam kol kovecha lo yevshu. Yevshu habogdim rekam. Let those who trust in you, who hope in you, let them not be ashamed, confounded in the Geneva. Let those who are traitors, who betray God, either for no reason or do so. How did this say? Let the faithless be disappointed empty-handed. It's a different way of learning it, a different way of reading it. First of all, we love the doubling at the center, the Yevshu, at the end of the first clause, at the beginning of the second clause. And as we said also, David is generalizing this. So it's not only him who has hope. And I think hope, tikva, has implicit within it a kind of fulfillment that hope in English doesn't. There is hope for the end which we know will come. The salvation is built in, yet the hope is very real and present and urgent, but there still is that future orientation towards something that's known, but is, however, it's known, but when it will actually materialize or actualize, that's not known. Here, Darchecha Hashem hodieni, or Chosecha lamdeni, teach me, guide me, God, and inform me. Darchecha Hashem hodieni, inform me of your ways. Orchotecha lamdeni, let me learn your paths, ways, paths. I don't know. Hadricheni, this repetition, ba'amitcha v'lamdeni, let me be guided. Notice this, darchecha, darcheni, first noun, then verb, then the kind of parallel between hodieni and ba'amitecha, the truth. Guide me in your truth, v'lamdeni. Here's where the parallelism ends. And lamdeni, we need to do something with that. Some of the commentators say the lamdeni here is, hadricheni is, inform me, tell me about your ways of truth. The lamdeni is, let me be more regular in them, habituate me to them. Kiata, and here's the gesture towards the personal, kiata, Elokai ishi, you are the God of my salvation. Otcha kiviti kol hayom, for you I have hoped all of the day. All of the day is my hope for God, is that forward tendency. For you, I am yearning all the day. It's not only yearning for some kind of metaphysical union with the divine, it's for the time fulfilled. And then in the next is a gorgeous verse, Zachora chamecha, remember your kindnesses, your mercies, Hashem b'chasadecha ki me'olam hema. Here's like a textual crux. I mean, it's just because it lends itself to so many different interpretations. The first thing we will comment on is that remember something, because they were, and let's go for a simple reading, they were forever. So the pasuk starts going back, Zachora chamecha, and then ends going forward to eternity, ki me'olam hema. Now there are other interpretations of me'olam hema where me'olam hema has precise antecedents, not necessarily in the poem. One is me'olam hema, your chesed was available from Adam Harishon, from the very beginning of time. Another way of saying forever, kind of, but more backwards based. And another pshat, we saw this in the Radak earlier, that you, from the very beginning of my life, you sustained me through my mother. The Radak says that another place also, the primal or the paradigm chesed in the world is this chesed, not at the beginning of the life of Adam Harishon, the life of humanity, but the life of the individual. Nice, right? I mean, I think all of these can kind of collapse into each other. Remember those, and my sins, chatut norai, my sins of my youth and my transgressions. Very hard verse to understand. The first part is easy. Remember your kindness. Don't remember all the bad things I did. In kachastecha, as is your way, your chesed, zachar li ata. It's nice the way in which the li is stuck between the zachar li and the ata. Very often we see the me surrounded. Laman tuvcha Hashem, on behalf of for your goodness, God. That tuvcha now will translate down in the next verse to David himself. Tuv v'yashar Hashem al kein yorech hatayim b'derech. Tov v'yashar Hashem al kein yorech hatayim b'derech. Tov, good and upright are you, God. Therefore, you will show the sinners a path, or you will help sinners on their path. Come back to that in a second. Yadrich anavim b'mishpat, yilmod anavim darko. Look at the doubling here. Yadrich anavim darko. What is this? He guides the lowly in the right path and teaches the lowly his way. Right? This mishpat they're not even bothering with, because mishpat sounds like law. Let's see what the Geneva Bible does with it. Gracious and righteous is the Lord, therefore we teach sinners the way. God, will he, them that be meek, lowly, will he guide in judgment and teach the humble way? I mean, it is a pshat, but it's not the correct. I mean, it's not related to the words, I don't think. But you see, people are struggling with the mishpat. Now, the Radak, who we have come back to many times, and the Radak, I find that each time he kind of pushes us back into David's psychological reality in ways that make our reading of David really as a kind of everyman figure. And I don't mean every man like every other man, like a person that we relate to. But here, and he also is going to deal with a bit mishpat. Let's actually read this together in Hebrew. Just 1 second. And we're back. So here it is right here. Yidrech anavim b'mishpat. Otam, those hanichnayim, those people who subordinated themselves, v'shavim b'chatam, and they turned from their sins. Yadricham b'mishpat, guide them in justice. And then here's the colon, which is so bizarre here. Yiftach lehem derech hatshuva. Open for them the way of tshuva, the way of return. V'yachin libam ledat mishpatei hakel v'darchav. Let's just focus on the yiftach lehem derech hatshuva. Somehow the mishpat, God's law here, is really reading this in a kind of counterintuitive way. God's law here is to open the way up for sinners. Kol archot Adonai chesed ve'emet lenotri brito ve'edotav. I mean, this is so rich and so beautiful. There's just so much here. All the ways of God are chesed, are justice and truth to those who keep his covenant. I hated that. To those who so unto such as keep his covenant and his testimonies. Those people who keep his covenant and testimonies, if you keep God's covenant and testimonies, then you will know God as a God of chesed ve'emet. If you're part of that world, if you are part of that world of keeping, of guiding, let's see, is that watching over or keeping or safeguarding or preserving. Once you're internal to that, then you know what chesed ve'emet is. There's no such thing as chesed ve'emet in some kind of non-worldly ideal, right? There's no vulgar Platonic form for chesed or emet. They are for the people who keep his covenant and those who read those people or who are consider themselves the brothers of those people. And it relates if when the Torah is given in Exodus, the people of Israel say Naseh v'nishma. We will hear and we will do, which is reversed, of course. And the we will hear is l'notzrei brito. We will do. Naseh v'nishma. We will do and we will hear. The notzrei brito ve'edotav, that comes first. Na'aseh v'nishma, then we will hear it, then we will hear it, then we will understand it. We don't understand it until we're part of it. Truth is being part of something. Emet is being part of something. Chesed also, apparently, right? Now let's go back to here. Tov v'yashar Hashem al kein yorech hatayim b'derech. This is in all of the Chatayim B'derech is tshuva. We saw it in the Radak. There are other places as well. Other meforshim, other commentators. I mean, I'm just mentioning them all because it seems like that's what that seems to be. There's a consensus on this, and there's a midrash that describes this, or eventually comes to this as a verse, as a proof text. Let me describe it for you. There are cities of refuge. And the Midrash discusses, well, how are these unintentional murderers who will take advantage of the cities of refuge, how do they get there? And Moses asks this question, and God responds and says, well, you put up signs, accidental murder, city of refuge, this way. It's quite literal the way it's expressed in the Midrash, that you need signposts in order to get there. And then the proof text is, Tov yashar Hashem al kein yorech hatayim b'derech. He helps the people on the road. He helps those people who are looking for the city of refuge on the road. But let's read that meaning back in here, which is, of course, we're licensed to do that. There is that idea that God, Tov yashar Hashem al kein yorech hatayim b'derech. I think the way of reading this is that God helps people read the signs of their own life to put them on the right path. Just like the accidental murderer looks for the signs, how am I going to get to my goal? God, we have to work more on this. God teaches his people to do tshuva, and doing tshuva means reading properly, reading your own life properly. I think there's more to be said about that, and I can understand if you're not convinced, but it seems there's something there. Then David goes back to himself. I've sinned a ton, and we have in the background, we have the sin of Bathsheba and David's intense sense of unworthiness. And then I think we come to a kind of transitional moment. We're out of the second person, Laman Shimcha, my sins are horrible, do it for your name in the second person. And then David says, and here I think David is turning from his own personal plea to this teaching moment. And we've talked about this before, that with David, he has all of these doubts, but notwithstanding these doubts, he must be a teacher. Miza ha'ish yirah Hashem yoreinu b'derech b'yivcha. Whoever fears who is this, the man who fears God, he shall be shown in the path that he chooses. Explosions going off in brain, right? Mizeh ha'ish yireh Hashem. Who is the one who fears God? We saw David refer to himself in Psalm 34. Who is the man who desires life? And we said that David is like, I am that man. Mizeh ha'ish, so he is holding himself up as a representative, but it's also generalized. Yireh Hashem, yorenu b'derech yivchar. The turn outwards, the teaching. And here is in these words, yorenu b'derech yivchar, are compressed the attempts or the problem and the solution, as it were, that has confounded philosophers and theologians for thousands of years. Confounded them because philosophically, the relationship between free will and providence is something that cannot be solved. It cannot be solved. Why can't it be solved? Because God can't simultaneously know everything I'm going to do and me choose freely, right? Right. Any way you try to fetch it, it's not going to work out. Because if you tell me that God knows all of my choices, well, then they're not choices because they're predetermined. Now, I'm going to just pause for a moment because I want to look at this passage in the context of something completely different. Okay, so I said we would consult a different framework altogether, and we are here with book 12 of Milton's Paradise Lost, the very last book, the very last lines. Adam and Eve have been tossed out of Eden. They've gotten extensive instructions about what it will mean to live in the world. And at the very end, they've been given this pep talk by the archangel Michael. Michael is the educator. Paradise Lost is all about education. And Adam and Eve, before they can go out into the world, they need to get the right education. The right education is learning how to read. Here's the narrator at the end of the poem, the last 4 lines. The world was all before them. And here again, we're doing this in the context of what we saw here in this psalm. This line here, Yorenu b'derech Hashem yorenu b'derech yivchar. God will, this man who fears, God will guide him in the path that he will choose. So the problem here is, what do you mean? God will guide him so that he will choose? Which one is it? And in Paradise Lost, Milton is kind of dealing with the same issue. Some natural tears, this is line 645, they dropped, but wiped them soon. The world was all before them, where to choose their place of rest and providence their guide. They hand in hand with wandering steps and slow through Eden took their solitary way. Now later 18th century critics of everybody wants to argue about everything that Milton means. And some people, especially in the 18th century, they didn't like what Milton said so much that they felt the need to rewrite it. They blamed the printer, they blamed Milton's daughters, because Milton was blind when he recited it to his daughters. So one critic in particular in 1732, this guy named Richard Bentley, says, how is it possible? What's going on here? They finished crying. If Providence is their guide, then why are their steps wandering and slow? Why are they taking a solitary way? Meaning Bentley wants to go all the way. The 18th century, the ability to accommodate doubt went away in the 18th century. 18th century is more the age of certainty, of enlightenment, of pushing off all sorts of things that Milton represents. One of them being not doubt, but complexity. That is, Bentley says their Providence is guiding them. They're happy, and he rewrites it. It's something about hand in hand they walk with, cheerful and happy, or something like that. He turns this into an unambiguous happy ending. But Milton, in emphasizing, first of all, their place of rest, which first of all, where to choose sounds really good. Their place of rest, already, it's an intimation of death here. There's all of this ambiguity here, and Milton does that because he's accommodating simultaneously the feeling of living in a world of suffering and choosing in that world, and also being guided at the same time. Why is it better poetically? And it's better poetically because we can imagine, especially after we've read Paradise Lost or David's Psalms, for example, and it's the same thing in David's Psalms, that we are in a story that we know the end. There is this temporal frame that towards which we are tending, but it doesn't erase, and this is how Paradise Lost is a Miltonic poem. It doesn't erase, a Davidic poem. It doesn't erase the experience of the here and now of suffering. So there's simultaneous and of choice. There's simultaneously the providential guidance, and there's also the choosing. Again, you can't solve the problem, but there's choosing on one temporal path, and that temporal path is the one that I experience. And in my experience, I am choosing. I'm moving towards an end. I don't know how I'm going to get there or if I'm going to get there. But there is that providence, that over story in which my story is contained. Let's just skip down to, I think, the penultimate line. Another beautiful line. Tom v'yosher yitzronim. So here are words that we've seen before. Before God was tov v'yashar. Here's tom v'yasher, good and decent, will guard over me. So there's the similarity between David the human and God. There's this identification between God and David. Tom v'yosher, will watch over me. And remember the verb we saw earlier when we were talking about that needing to be part of an existent community before I knew what these words are. Chesed ve'emet are for those who guard the covenant. They are part of something. And David here in the last or the penultimate line of the poem is talking about how his integrity and decency, whatever, are watch over me. The way I was formed by you, identified by, and I am identified with you, they watch over me. Because I am hoping towards you. I am hoping for you. It's not only the observance. I mean, the observance is all sorts of causal relations. I am decent and upright, and these things will guard me. What is the here? For I look to you, because I look to you. So there's the simultaneous idea of Yitzruni, I don't even know, to guard, watch, or keep over, to be kept over. They will watch over me. Let's just look at, I'm still bothered here. You see, that's what this guy says. The Geneva Bible says, let mine uprightness and equity preserve me, for mine hope is in thee. Let this preserve me, my goodness preserve me, because I hope in you. Somehow there is definitely the assertion at the end of the psalm, the man in God's image. but man in God's image also striving towards the future. And it's interesting. I mean, all we have at the end of this poem is the striving. I mean, this is, by the way, an acrostic. I don't know what to do with that. It's an imperfect acrostic. I don't know what to do with that. Padei Elokim et Yisrael mikol tzorotav. And there's the outward turn. And here David is again kind of, it almost feels like David has to reassert the official line of the poem. Meaning we leave David in distress, I think. I mean, in hopeful distress, but in distress. And then there's the kind of, I mean, maybe it's a teaching moment, but the turn outward. I mean, remember in the first verse, David is inclusive, tiviti, not only me, but other people. And here David turns outwards and says, let all of Israel be redeemed, even as he's totally unsure of his own redemption. And that's the point that we should end on it. And it can't be repeated too much. And we see this all over Psalms. We already mentioned it here today. David is in doubt about himself, but he knows his responsibilities to others. He's a teacher.